as a buffer bush between the two property as required by code. I suggest this board look at upright junipers, which is far more deer resistant than arborvitae. Thank you.
Thank you.
Donna Giacaruso, 39 Woodfield.
Donna Giacaruso, 39 Woodfield Drive. The last we left off at the last public hearing, thank you, Stephanie, you had acknowledged that the applicant did need a second variance for the parking, and that still holds, correct?
Correct.
So assuming then, you're assuming you may get it, if you do not get that variance and the parking needs to be behind those buildings, and now we're adding another 20-something parking spaces, how will that work out? Number two, I'm a little bit confused also, Bob and John, after the last meeting. There was confusion regarding the variance for either a lot line removal or was it for density? One thought one, the other thought the other. What exactly is that second variance required for?
Okay.
So, for clarification purposes, you're right, there are two variants being sought by this applicant. The first one is the one that was brought out during the public hearing, which is the requirement to have the parking. The second variance is for the density. They are allowed the 7 per building, 7 units per building, and they're asking for an additional 14 units. That grant of the additional 14 units would be a zoning board of appeals question.
So if it's for the density, what about the lot line removal?
The lot line
There is
removal
no
is,
variance required to remove a lot line.
right, that's within this board's jurisdiction, that's a planning board question.
There is no variance required to remove a lot line?
No.
It's considered a subdivision. So,
Well, that's news to me. I don't even know what to say. You have 2 parcels, one of them is landlocked. Give or take, they're about, the one that you can, that's buildable is 2.3 acres, right? It comes out to about 100,000 square feet. The second parcel is landlocked. You're using it strictly for density purposes, all right? So if we're correct in our math here, you're dividing, you have 14,000 square foot minimum per unit, correct?
Removal,
14,000 square foot minimum square feet per dwelling unit.
removal of a lot line does not require a variance in many municipalities in the county. It's actually done automatically without the owner's consent if the properties are owned by the same ownership.
There was a meeting in June of '21. Another applicant was asking for whether or not they needed a variance for 2 buildings on 1 lot. They were told they did. There was a letter that went out, John, from you
that was,
and from building inspector requiring a variance for 2 buildings on 1
Ms.
parcel.
Giacaruso, you're correct, that was the determination by the village at the time. The applicant at the time appealed that decision by the building inspector. That went to the zoning board of appeals, and the zoning board of appeals ruled against the building inspector and found that they were permitted to have, per the code, were permitted to have 2 buildings on 1 lot.
I saw that
Yeah.
meeting. So, again,
So they don't need that variance.
And just to interject, have you read the 2 lines of code that decision was based on?
I watched the meeting,
No,
that
you
ZBA
need to-
meeting.
But again, you need to read the lines of code and what it says, and then it becomes very, very clear how that happened, in my opinion. And
Well, I've asked, you tell me.
I have a copy, I'm happy to give it to you. You can
But
foil
there's
it.
a written decision.
Everything's been foiled. We're
It
not
should
getting our
be there then,
foils.
there's a written decision on that I can show, right after the meeting, I'd be happy to show you.
Right prior, and I'm talking days, not weeks, not months, but right prior to that, another applicant was told they needed a variance for that. Then all of a sudden, days later, it goes to the ZBA, and there was a attorney-client privilege. They walk out into the hallway, and all of a sudden, they come back to override the building inspector's determination to need a variance.
Yeah, Ms. Giacaruso, that's the procedure, that's the correct legal procedure under both the village code and state code in terms of how a ZBA is able to operate. That's correct.
But the first determination was made by engineer and building inspector.
Correct, the building inspector, like, just as a general facet of municipal law, the building inspector is your first line of code interpretation. And then anything that they issue as a determination under code can be appealed by the person that receives the interpretation. And that
Somebody
just,
explain to me then, where in the code does it say that that is permissible, because I've not seen it.
so the ZBA made that decision, and I'd be happy to share that decision with you.
I understand they made the decision, but what I'm asking is where in our code is
The
that?
lines of code are
Because
in
I
the
am-
decision.
Sorry?
The lines of code are referenced, I'm sorry.
They, as the ZBA, are able to review determinations of code interpretation of the building inspector.
So it
That's
was-
one of their many
It was the
code
ZBA's attorney's interpretation, that's what it was.
No, it has to be a vote by the board. As you know, the attorneys, we don't have any decision-making power. It's completely by the board.
Did you see that meeting, Stephanie? That was concerning to me, because she used attorney-client privilege in the middle of that meeting and pulled everybody out into the hallway, and then all of a sudden they come back and the decision is overruled.
Ms. Caruso, as you know, any members of any municipal boards have the right to be able to talk to their attorney in confidentiality. So that would be a legitimate procedure.
I'm assuming the rest of the board received a letter stating from the attorney that the process was fatally flawed and should be nullified, and the applicant should reapply. The board members all get that letter?
The letter
The letter from
from,
Mr. Mogul.
From Stephen Mogul.
that was submitted before the last
Everybody?
meeting.
Is that being taken into consideration?
It becomes part of the public record, yes.
Did the other board members get the letter?
Did everybody receive the letter, Ms.
Yes.
Caruso, referencing?
Ms. Jackaruso, you through?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mike Graziano, 3 Lark Street.
I would urge the planning board not to change any lot lines, boundaries, any other rules, variances to accommodate this project. We don't need this type of dense housing in this location. There are more appropriate spaces for this type of project. I know our focus is on 61 East Main Street, but I just want to reference, there was a project for a bus garage. They moved it out to Middletown over by Tex. It's a much more appropriate spot for that project, where they're located now, and I think there's a more appropriate spot for 28 units here. We've already talked about the stress on the traffic, the water, the schools. I know tonight you said that there's plenty of water. I know last year we went through a water restriction for months and months and months, so I don't understand how we say we've got plenty of water. There's water as long as it rains and we have no, heavy usage on it. So I don't understand that point. My preference would be to keep the old house, fix it up, and keep the open space that we have. We don't need, so much construction that it gets overwhelming here in the village. With that said, if the zoning allows for 7 apartments with 7 commercial buildings below it, so be it. That's fine. I mean, the applicant has the right to build that there. We can't object to that because that's what's permitted by law. If they did something like that and they kept the architecture similar to what they have by Orange County Bagel, it'd be pleasant maybe for our village. And I'm not sure about the tax revenue for the village. It might be more advantageous to have commercial versus all residential in there. And, all the people that are involved in this project, I don't think they live here in this village. And they don't have to deal with all the problems we have to, like driving to Stop and Shop and dealing with getting from the high school to the traffic light in the village. So I just want to say, I hope we take all those things into consideration when we make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Lyons, 8 Decker.
Hi, I'm Tom Lyons from 8 Decker Drive. I have a couple of questions that still weren't answered. First of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Engineer, who paid